Welcome back to Leading Blind. Today I am excited because we are going to discuss 1988's Dangerous Liaisons. Produced by Larimar Film Entertainment and distributed by Warner Brothers, this movie stars John Malkovich, Glenn Close, Michelle Pfeiffer, Keanu Reeves, Uma Thurman, and Swoosie Kurtz. Buckle in, ladies and gentlemen, because as the first English version of this story, which was written in the 18th century and read by Marie Antoinette herself. This is a story about two ex-lovers who make a bet that involves revenge, desire, love, betrayal, and corruption. Once again, spoilers abound because this plot gets really, really complicated, and I fully expect to get smacked by the ID bot just like I was for my Audrey Rose review, because it's going to take a lot of pictures to help you follow this one. In pre-revolutionary France, the Marquise de Mertel, played by Glenn Close, plots revenge against her ex-lover, the Comte de Bastide, who unceremoniously jilted her and is intending to marry the daughter of her own young cousin, Cécile de Volanges. Her revenge includes roping in yet another ex-lover with whom she is still friends, the Vicomte de Valmont, who is known seducer and ruiner of women's reputations. She asks him to seduce the 15-year-old convent-raised Cécile so that when her ex-lover marries, he will find out he did not receive the guaranteed virtue he'd been intending in a bride. The Vicomte de Valmont refuses at first, proclaiming that it would be much too easy and would be beneath his reputation as a seductor. He thinks that because she was raised in a convent, she will be curious and is likely to fall on her back for him at the very first opportunity. And then he tells her that he has his own seduction in mind. Staying with his aunt, the Madame de Rosemont, is a young, recently married woman to a member of parliament, Madame de Tavel. She is played by Michelle Pfeiffer. He intends to seduce this pious, notoriously religious woman who is known for the happiness of her marriage. And he wants to do this while never breaking down her belief system. He wants her to still not be able to help herself. And intrigued by this, Glenn Close's character, Madame de Martel, says that if he can succeed and provide for her written proof of the liaison, that she will spend a night with him. While Valmont goes off to his aunt's house to begin his attempted seduction, Martel is left to her own devices in reference to her cousin Cécile, and Cécile is played by a young, relatively unknown Uma Thurman. At the opera house, she introduces her young second cousin to Keanu Reeves' character, Chevalier Raphael Danceny, who is a music teacher and suggests that her cousin employ him for Cécile. This ploy works to a point because the two do begin to fall in love and begin exchanging letters on the sly, but unfortunately, to Martel's great disappointment, the two of them are very clearly chastely in love and are not about to get in a sack and ruin each other anytime soon. She lucks out, though, because after Valmont strikes out with Tavel after proclaiming love and pretending to go through all these changes and starting to leave behind his playboy seductive ways, he finds out that she has been warned of his reputation, and through blackmail of her maid, discovers this source of information is Cécile's mother, which immediately sets him on a course of revenge because Tavel says if he really cares for her, that he will leave the house. And he obliges. He leaves his aunt's house. But he returns straight to Paris and asks if he can be any help with Cécile. Because he wants to make the Volanges bitch, as he calls her, pay for, basically ruining his scheme. Madame de Martel, getting nowhere with Keanu Reeves' character, manages to convince the cousin of the letters that are being exchanged by Cecile and Danceny, and sends them to Madame Rosamond's house, where she does not quite realize Malkovich has been banished. So he goes back as well. Once there, he devises to get the key to the young lady's room, and he goes in there at night, and when she goes to scream, he says, "How are you going to convince your mother that I forced my way in here or anything like that? If I tell her that you invited me here, she's going to believe me." And thus he essentially rapes the young girl. It isn't a violent assault as I understand it, but he does blackmail her into sleeping with him, and she becomes very distressed and very ill. Not so much ill, but she locks herself up in her room for days. She won't really speak to her mother. She's very ashamed, and in her concern, Madame de Volanges contacts her sweet cousin, the wonderful role model for her daughter, Madame de Martel, to speak with her. This is where things get even more sinister, because Glenn Close's character, Madame de Tervel, convinces Cecile to continue sleeping with Valmont, to make him her instructor in the art of love. Because, as she puts it, when it comes to a husband, one is just as good as another. If somebody takes a few elementary precautions, they can do it or not as one likes, with as many as one likes, in as many ways as one likes. And this is amazingly sinister, because Cecile thinks this is for her own good, even though she knows she can't tell her mom about it. So, yes, Valmont gets to keep sleeping with the 15-year-old Cecile while he's still trying to seduce Madame de Tervel and convince her that he's in love with her. And Madame de Tervel starts falling for him because she accepts at least, yes, this man is in love with me, and yes, he's changing, but I'm going to just accept his friendship. He understands that I'm married and I have no intention of being with him, but we will be friends. At one point, however, he does have a night where he nearly seduces her, but she becomes so distressed over her guilt when he picks her up and puts her on the bed to A, seduce her fully, and B, to help her breathe because she's hyperventilating. He releases her. He decides not to go through with it because he's just moved and feels guilty about what he's forcing onto this woman. Madame de Tervel takes the opportunity of not being seduced to speak to Valmont's aunt, who admits that she's devoted to her nephew, but that she knows all things that are true of men who are incapable of being exclusive with one woman or loving a woman the way a woman loves a man is doubly so. And if he's released her, then she should leave. So she does. She leaves in the middle of the night, but she's still highly distressed. She refuses to take his letters anymore. She won't admit him to her house, and she's barely eating. And during all this, Valmont is still sleeping with Cecile, and he's also sleeping with a courtesan named Emily. After a few weeks, once Tervel has gone home, she finally admits John Malkovich to her home again, under the impression he wishes to formally apologize to her for his behavior before going to study with a priest. Now, the film doesn't make entirely clear what this means, if he is just going to learn his catechisms and become a new Christian after a lifetime of being a playboy, or if he's planning to become a monk, but it's through a priest that he gains entrance to the house under false pretenses, and while he's there, he tells her that he has been treated with nothing but contempt by her, and he really can't take it anymore. He needs to be with her. He needs to love her and be loved by her, or he's going to die. And when she starts to rebuff him, he says, "Death it is then." And because she takes this as meaning he's going to commit suicide, she admits that she can't be happy anymore unless she makes him happy, and she allows him to seduce her. Immediately afterwards, we see Valmont speaking to Glenn Close's character, Martel, about the night of the seduction, confessing to her that the event is unprecedented in his experience, that it had a charm he's never felt before, and that there was something about it that lasted for him for hours beyond the physical pleasure. That he actually fell to his knees and proclaimed his never-ending love to her, and he said he believed it at that time and for several hours afterwards. This, of course, makes Myrtle very, very jealous, and it turns her off completely. Not to mention that he may have succeeded and she believes him, but he does not have the written proof their bet required for her to agree to sleep with him for another night. So she ends up admitting that she's taken another lover, and he says that he'd like to be lovers with her again, that they loved each other once, and they untied a knot that was never broken so they could still have things together again. But for the time being, there's absolutely nothing he can do about it. She can have her lover, he's got his, whatever. And this just pisses her off even more, the way he says it's beyond my control. So, in the meantime, there's a little bit more hijinks. We see that he is entertaining a courtesan that we saw in his bed earlier in the movie, and Torvald comes to see him, and he allows Torvald to see the courtesan as she's leaving. And this strikes a jealous chord in her, and she assumes that, oh, well, he's sleeping with her, he's been lying to me this whole time, and he convinces her, no, I just give her charity. You know, yes, she's a courtesan, but she's a charitable woman. She earns a lot of money for charity. And for years now, my relationship with her has been of somebody donating to her causes. And then we see them in bed together again after she apologizes to him for her jealousy, and he says he didn't think he could love her more, but because of her jealousy, he does. And then during this time, Martel has left Paris for a couple of weeks, and we hear him writing letters back and forth with her. So she says, oh, well, if you're living like a hermit, I hope you're not neglecting Cecile. And thus we see him in Cecile's bed again. And she's finally back in Paris after over 2 months away. And she's looking for Danceny, and no one can find him. Valmont says he's got his men looking everywhere too, and nobody can find him. And while he's there, Cecile suffers a miscarriage. She had been carrying Valmont's child and loses the baby. So finally, after this very brief, alarming scene, he arrives at Martel's house, where Danceny, Keanu Reeves' character, the music teacher, is in Martel's bed, and he is the new lover she's taken up. But he explains he's looking for Danceny. He says, Cecile is sick, and she was looking for you. The surgeon says that she's on the road to recovery, but of course she's distressed because she can't find you. And he says, I'm sorry, but I also have business with de Martel. So Keanu Reeves' character leaves, and Valmont shows Martel the letter that Madame de Tervel sent him. Because the last time we saw them making love, he said, when will you start writing to me again? So he's been able to obtain proof of their liaison. This doesn't go over entirely well, however, because even though he has the letter, the two of them want to get the other to dump their lovers. Madame Martel tells Valmont a story about a friend of hers who realized he was going to be the laughingstock of all society and his friends because he was losing his reputation over a very unworthy woman he fell in love with. And that he eventually discarded her, and all he kept saying to her was, it's beyond my control. Unfortunately, this is exactly what John Malkovich does, which of course is what Martel wanted him to do. He goes to Torvel, he says, you gave me a lot of pleasure, but there's another woman in my life now. I'm done with you. You should take another lover. And he is brutal in this scene. He pulls her by her hair. He's basically throwing her around the room, treating her like an object. And he just dumps her like this. He says, thanks for the good time. See ya. And in her guilt over her adultery and loving this man who was so obviously a seducer and a Don Giovanni or Don Juan, she falls incredibly ill unto the point where she's admitted to a monastery for treatment. And then Fed up with waiting, Valmont goes to Martel again and demands to have their night together. He's provided the proof, he's gotten rid of Torvel, he wants Danceny out of her bed, and he wants his night with her. And she says, but I'm expecting company. And he says, no, you're not. I told Danceny that he was really going to have to make a choice. And although he devotes to you his eternal friendship, he didn't hesitate. He's with Cecile tonight. And infuriated and jealous and thinking that she won this war against him, because he says, if you do not give me my night tonight, I will declare it as an act of war. She says, very well, war. And the next thing we hear is a letter to Danceny from her saying that, I know you spent last night with Cecile, and I learned this from her more regular lover, the Vicomte de Valmont. And as we're finishing this letter, we see that Danceny is having a duel with Valmont. In this fight, Valmont is mortally wounded by Keanu Reeves' character Danceny. And he gives Danceny a big wad of all his letters that he's been receiving for the past many months from Martel, illustrating her duplicity and her maliciousness and her manipulations. And he says, you may feel you wish to circulate these, but I also need you to get into the monastery to see Madame de Tervel. Tell her how sorry I am. Tell her I really, truly loved her, and I never should have parted with her the way I did. And Danceny promises he will do this. And we see him go to there and speak to Torvel. And she asks him to close the curtains, and then we see that she dies there at the monastery with Madame and Cecile Volange looking over. We never hear this in the movie, but apparently Cecile, in her shame, went back to the convent and became a nun. But I only found that out through research. What we do see is Madame Martel receiving the news of Valmont's death, and she is in a hysterical state. I mean, she is sobbing, she is throwing and breaking things, and she is absolutely distraught, although what the fuck else did she expect to happen? But the very next scene is her happy and composed going to the opera, where it turns out all those letters, they got around. And she is humiliated and booed out of the theater by all the people who used to once adore her. So the last thing we see is the desolate look on her face as she washes all her makeup off, the powder and everything when she gets home. And she just looks like a completely ruined soul. Needless to say, I love this movie. There are so many amazing scenes in it. Stephen Frears, who directed this movie, was also the director for such amazing movies as The Queen, Philomena, and another John Malkovich Glenn Close film, Mary Riley. Christopher Hampton, who wrote the script based on the teleplay for the Broadway and London show of Dangerous Liasons, which originally starred Alan Rickman, of all people. God, I would have loved to see him as Valmont. Also wrote the script for a movie I saw called A Dangerous Method, which is a really, really weird movie about Freud, I believe. And you can tell it's written by the same director. There's a lot of that corruptive, forbidden lust stuff going on in there. And it's definitely an interesting little duo. To prove just how mega this cast is, although I'm pretty sure everyone watching has heard of at least most of these people at some point or other in their lives, I'm going to give you a brief history of all these actors and some of the shit they've been in, but I'm going to be picking mostly things that are either so far in the past the newer generation may not know of them, or I just think they're underappreciated movies by myself. Glenn Close, other than this movie, as I've said, was also in Mary Riley, but also she starred in the Stepford Wives remake, Hamlet, Air Force One as a vice president, and she was phenomenal in that too. And one of her most definitive roles, Fatal Attraction. John Malkovich, other than being in Mary Riley, and of course this movie, Dangerous Liaisons, was in The Shadow of a Vampire, a TV movie of Les Miserables with Gerard Depardieu was the main character. Gerard Depardieu played the main character. John Malkovich played his nemesis, Javert. He was also brilliant in Man in the Iron Mask and had an interesting little role in the rom-com Warm Bodies. Michelle Pfeiffer got her start in the horribly amazing Grease 2. She was in Scarface, she was in Wolf, Lady Hawk, Hairspray, and an amazing little role she had was in the Sean Penn movie called I Am Sam. Uma Thurman, I don't know very well. I know many things that she's been in, but I haven't seen them personally, so I'm just going to stick with The Truth About Cats and Dogs, which is an amazing rom-com, and Les Miserables, not the same one John Malkovich was in, but the Hollywood movie starring Jeffrey Rush and Liam Neeson. Keanu Reeves, everyone now knows from things like Speed and The Matrix, but he was in a plethora of amazing movies, from Constantine to the two Bill and Ted movies, Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. He was also in Parenthood, an amazing Steve Martin comedy. And of course, we must discuss briefly Swoosie Kurtz, who played Cecile's mother, the Devalange bitch, because she was also in a modernization of this story called Cruel Intentions. She had a small role, but she was in that movie in the very beginning as Valmont's psychiatrist. And that's just hilarious. A little information on the actual story of Dangerous Liaisons. It is a novel that came out as a serial, I believe, during the 18th century in the 1700s, before the revolution in Paris, which took the head of Marie Antoinette. And it was so scandalous that when Marie wanted to order herself a copy, they had to put it inside a blank cover so that no one would know what she was reading. And that's hilarious to me, especially since this is a story basically about high society aristocrats using their money and privilege to destroy the lives of others, particularly those beneath their station. The movie received 3 Oscars, BAFTA awards, multiple other awards around the world, and Michelle Pfeiffer won a BAFTA, I believe. But unfortunately, no cast members won the Oscars. It was for Best Set, Best Art Direction, and Best Adaptation of a Screenplay. Michelle Pfeiffer and John Malkovich were carrying on an affair during the filming of this. 1 month after this movie came out, another movie based on Liasons Les Dangereuses came out called Valmont. And it has another all-star cast, and I will be reviewing that movie in the future. But the funny thing is that people who starred in Valmont and people who starred in Dangerous Liaisons both auditioned for either movie. Like, Swoosie Kurtz auditioned for that one, but didn't get it. Annette Bening auditioned for, who is in Valmont, auditioned for Swoosie Kurtz's role, I believe, in Dangerous Liaisons, but she ended up getting Glenn Close's role in Valmont. So there's a lot of crisscrossing there, and it's really cool. There are a lot of different versions of this story out there now, Cruel Intentions being the modern update that I love the most. I haven't seen a lot of the foreign ones. But I am looking forward to telling you about Valmont, but that will be down the line. I'm not going to do the movies back to back. There are just so many high drama, intense moments, and it's helped along by the score. Oh, let me tell you, it feels really intense. But there are some amazing scenes, particularly between one of the many that John and Glenn are in. The first one, when they're making the bet, is really good. They talk about love and revenge, and they discuss cruelty and what their favorite words are. And Glenn Close is so damned witty in this, and the screenplay has got to be given the credit for that, I'm sure. I mean, she's always giving him these little snide, acidic things, like, once upon a time you were a man to be reckoned with. At one point, he is discussing how he will seduce Madame de Tervel, all in good time, and she says, "The century is drawing to its close, Vicomte." There's just a ton of great little lines like that. Another line of Myrtle's I really love is when they're discussing how she's grateful that the Vicomte seduced Cecile. And then she says, I think from now on you will find her door unbolted. And he says, isn't it too bad the bet didn't refer to me doing that and it referred to this instead? And she's like, oh, I'm grateful, of course, but that would have been insultingly simple. One does not applaud the tenor for clearing one's throat. Or funny lines from John Malkovich. They're discussing Danceny and his relationship with Cecile and how it's getting the Marquise nowhere. And she says maybe you could stiffen his resolve or give him some hindrances. And help him. John Malkovich's character Valmont says he doesn't need help, he needs hindrances. Given enough of them, he might inadvertently fall on top of her. And there are amazing lines, and some of them, they make you understand where these people are coming from, even if they're from horrible places. I mean, the protagonists of this film are horrible people. Even John Malkovich, he never stops screwing around. He never stops lying through his teeth. And through 99% of the movie, he's just lying to himself about the fact that he is in love with Torvel. And he even dumps her cold just because his reputation is threatened. And Madame de Martel is playing all these games because she can. They're games of revenge and spite and grudges, and it's all so horrible what they do to these poor people. And the performances in this are just so damn good. And it's amazing how these horrible people can just draw us in and make us root for them, or not root for them, but just want to see more of them. I very highly recommend this movie. This movie, if I gave this stars, it would be 5 out of 5 stars. There is virtually nothing wrong with this movie except perhaps a few badly delivered lines, a little bit of wooden acting, particularly from Keanu or John Malkovich. I love John Malkovich, but he's a hell of a wooden actor a lot of the times. But he really does pull off Valmont very, very well. And he pulls off a very different kind of Valmont from the one we'll be seeing next time I review this story. So I already put up a poll on Facebook. Frailty seems to have won for my next review. If you don't want that one for some reason, please feel free to leave me a comment. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and I will see you next time.